Hey, Steelers Nation, it's Joe Rockey coming back at you with another episode of the Pittsburgh Steelers Syndicate. And there has been a little bit of pushback I've gotten in the comments whenever I did my episode about how will the Pittsburgh Steelers be able to overcome Matt Canada. And yes, there's a lot of evidence to say that is very hard to do and possibly even unlikely. And there was a great thing saying that who's going to be the next coordinator after the inevitable Canada failure? Well, I'm not totally sure I'm 100% on that bus, certainly leaning that way. But I do think it's important to look at it because one thing about Tomlin is he hires from within. So the next answer, whether it be at the end of the season, middle of the season, or as I believe it happened last year in the end of that Cincinnati loss, who's actually pulling the strings and who's going to be the next Pittsburgh Steelers offensive coordinator? As we look at this staff, there are actually 4 different offensive staff members and a staff of roughly 8 men. 4 of them have either a direct 100% offensive coordinator experience or running game or passing game exclusive coordinator experience. So when we look at this all up, there's going to be options, and this episode is going to break down the options of the inevitable next offensive coordinator of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So when we look at this, there are 2 coaches on the offensive staff that have already been coordinators in the past. The first of which is Mike Sullivan. And no, I'm not talking about the Pens right now, but we have their own Sully over at the Steelers, who was the offensive coordinator at the Giants as well as at the Tampa Bay Bucks. So when we look at Mike Sullivan's history, both with Tampa and with the Giants, he was at Tampa in 2012 and 2013. During that time period, he was 9th in yardage, but 13th and then 30th in the second year in points. Not exactly what you want, only scoring 30th in points. That's right where we're at now. Then when we see what he did at his second stint, did he improve? Well, when he was with the Giants with Eli, he was 26th and 31st in points. Not exactly the glimmering ray of confidence that you want from an offensive coordinator. Not to mention the fact that he hasn't been one in about 6 years. Doesn't mean he doesn't have experience, but sometimes we look at this like Loki whenever he's talking to Thanos. If by failure you mean experience, Mike Sullivan has that. Again, he's potentially the one in line being the quarterback's coach to become the next offensive coordinator, but it's not exactly a, yay, I can't wait for this guy. So let's look at some of the other options that the Pittsburgh Steelers have on their roster. The next option on the roster is Glenn Thomas. Glenn Thomas has been working his way around the college world, trying to get into the NFL as an offensive coordinator. And in my opinion, his history and track record shows that he's probably going to be right there and one of the guys that we're going to be a front runner with. So going back all the way to 2004, he was the passing game coordinator at Midwestern State, then got promoted to offensive coordinator the next year, stayed there for 3 years. He was an offensive assistant at the Atlanta Falcons and then was their quarterback coach until he had a chance to become the straight-up offensive coordinator at Temple, which he did until 2017, where he got promoted by going to Baylor to becoming the offensive coordinator. And then he went from co-coordinator at Baylor to outright coordinator at UNLV for a 2-year stint. He spent last year at the promotion at Arizona State, and then Tomlin scooped him up to become the offensive assistant to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, while the Pittsburgh Steelers historically go from the quarterback's coach to offensive coordinator, there is a much larger trend going around the NFL of having the offensive specialist, offensive assistant. Really, the title isn't necessarily as important as the fact that he's not tied to a specific position room. And what that means is that he has the ability to give insight and overview to the entire offensive spectrum rather than being pigeonholed in the one spot. Now, granted, if you're going to be pigeonholed in the one room, the quarterback room's an important one. He's going to really dictate your success. But as we see, being able to be integral to the linemen, to the tight ends, to the quarterbacks, and being able to flush around to where the need is the greatest, not only gives you better relationships with all the various coaches there, it also gives it to you with the players. And that's why when I look at this, I think that Glenn Thomas is probably most likely the next man up for the inevitable change at offensive coordinator. Again, we've seen a lot of diversity in the way that the Steelers have done this. We have a guy who's the hot shot riser flying through the college ranks, but we also have two guys that are ready to prove themselves at the pro ranks. When we look at Pat Meyer is currently our offensive line coach. Pat Myers has also been the running game coordinator in 07 and 19 with the Chargers. He was a Canadian offensive coordinator and offensive line coach before going to the Bears earlier in his career as well. So we see a guy who knows how to manipulate running schemes. By all accounts, he's the best offensive line coach the Pittsburgh Steelers have had since Munchak left. And when we look at this is a guy who knows how to draw offenses, know how to draw the running game, which is incredibly important. And I just want to put a caveat on this. When he left the Chargers, their running game took a significant step backwards. Yes, there are many Steelers Nation who only know the Chargers running game as Austin Eckler, and they see him put up great fantasy numbers. That's because the dude catches the ball. They are not a good run between the ball team, and they haven't been under this new regime, which is when the coaching change happened and when Pat Meyer decided to leave, because being under Staley is never a good thing. Guys, if you want to watch me hate on Staley, go to my channel, Local Football Flavor, and just any content on the Chargers. Guy is horrible. 4th downs are times the punt, not to go for 4th and 8. Side story. I do believe that Pat Myers is a great addition to his team, and his voice and insight about how to make the running game better is phenomenal. And I love the fact that he's now getting his handprints from the start he's had here. He was involved in bringing in Daniels and the center Cole. He was involved in bringing in both Herbig and Samala this offseason. And then obviously his input is greatly with the first-round pick that you bring in Broderick Jones. So we look across the board. Oh, and not to mention, Chooks didn't let up a sack last year. This guy in Pat Myers has just gotten great coach written all over him. And he's one that I'm really glad the Steelers have had. I believe that his ability to, spot the talent and then develop it, and having the second half of the year being much more run game based has really shown well about why you'd want to consider Pat Myers as being an integral part of this team and an integral part of the future of the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I really hope that, we get him a chance. And I don't think he's a front runner, but I think there's a possibility that one day we see him as future offensive coordinator of the Pittsburgh Steelers. And then the fourth option that the Steelers have, another guy who has done part of the offensive game planning, is Frisman Jackson. He is the wide receivers coach. In his past, he has been passing game coordinator, although it has been at the college level at Temple. He has had a pedigree of being involved at some teams that have seen bad things happen. He was at Carolina's passing game when they didn't have a capable quarterback at all, but he still got the ball moving. And he also was at the time whenever they were moving the ball through throwing the ball to the running back. So when we look at these diverse schemes and histories that these four men bring to our potential future offensive coordinator position, I do think that as we look at this, that Glenn Thomas is your front runner, being the hot shot coming up and just going through the ropes. His promotion history of establishing himself and then taking a better job, establishing himself in a better job, yes, very opportunistic, but in the world of the NFL and coaching, sometimes that's what it takes. And the fact that he is here, the other part is most offensive assistants don't stay longer than 2 years. They get promoted or they get out. And the fact that Tomlin is bringing him around back for another go-around makes it really exciting to me. I think there's a very good chance that Thomas does end up being the guy. Personally, I hope it's not Sullivan based upon he didn't do it well at either Tampa or the Giants. But if I had to pick the second one, it would be Pat Meyer, because I love the way that this offensive line came to better last year. I love the way that we were able to essentially recruit Samala here, because let's face it, there are teams right now that don't have a starting left guard, the Ravens, and we have 3 of them. And the fact that Myers was able to bring him in here is a big deal. I mean, it really is. I mean, obviously, he's going to be one of the, I think he's the 5th best guard in football, period, right now. And he's here. And we have 2 other starters on our team. I mean, this is crazy, the type of factory that we just magically became. And it all started when Myers showed up as the building as being the offensive line coach. When you look at those 2 people, I believe between one of those 2, either Glenn Miller or Pat Meyer, we're going to see the future offensive coordinator of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Again, I do believe that looking at the tape, because I've seen the drastic change that happened before and after the loss to the Cincinnati Bengals, that is the biggest reason that the Pittsburgh Steelers offensive fortunes did start to turn around last year. The scheme itself changed. It's especially in the running game and the way that running plays were drawn up. And I believe that has a lot to do with the fact that the power of the voice of the Canadian went away. And to me, it's a shifting of him leaving power. And to me, that's a great opportunity for the Steelers to say, this isn't going to be a dictatorship like it was for the first season and a half of him here. We're no longer accepting this. What we're going to have now is results. This is Kenny time. This is an offense that is loaded. And you look at it, it's not just loaded in the potential of the top end guys, because Najee, I do believe, has the potential of being a top 5 running back in this league. I think Pickens has the potential of being on the doorstep of the top 5 receiver in this league. And when we look at the statistics of Kenny in the second half of the year, he was a top 10 quarterback on a game-to-game basis. There's no reason that this offense can't be at least at 21 a game. And 21 a game with the defense we have is a 13-win team. That's a bye team, and that's what's at stake here. This defense is so elite and so great that we can make this happen. And as the season goes on, if things go sideways, keep your eyes out, Steelers Nation, for Glenn Thomas and Pat Meyer. Start looking for articles for them to see if their voices look like they're starting to see, and you will see the tea leaves of which one of them eventually become the Pittsburgh Steelers' next offensive coordinator.